Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perdichizzi, and thank you for joining me. As always, Week 13 of the college football season is in the books. Week 12 of the NFL season has concluded as we are recording a day later than usual. Had some car issues yesterday. Did not get a chance to record on Monday night, the usual time slot, but we're back tonight. Quick episode, probably 30 minutes, setting the stage for where things are in terms of the NFL Draft Report, a quick Devy Slant Report, and then talking about the Sunday aspect of it with some discussion on the rookies, and then some fantasy dynasty tips as well. Let's start, as we've always done this year, with the quarterback position. The roller coaster continues for some of the top quarterback prospects, and I don't think anybody has rode the roller coaster more this year than Jalen Milroe out of Alabama. I am very intrigued with the raw traits, the athleticism, the speed, the arm talent to push the ball vertically down the field. And there have been moments this year where I thought he had put himself in the mix to be QB1. There are moments where I said, okay, I think there was a tier break between Shadu and Cam Ward and then Jalen Milroe, but he had enough raw traits that if Anthony Richardson can go in the top 5, I thought Jalen Milroe can go in the top 5. But this past week really kind of moved the needle the other way. 24-3 loss to Oklahoma, 11 of 26, 164 yards, and 3 interceptions. There's just been too much inconsistencies since we've seen him put together a high-level performance. I think probably his best, pathway is to go back to school, continue to refine and develop his game, and then maybe put himself in the mix to be a round 1 quarterback prospect next year. We've seen what Jaden Daniels did in his final year at college. We've seen other players really elevate their draft stock. I think he's got the raw traits to do that, but I just think it's been too much up and down right now. I think it would be hard-pressed for a team to invest a top 10 draft pick in him. Do I still think if he was the player, a team would be very intrigued with him somewhere, on day 2? For sure. There's just too much raw traits that I think are intriguing there. So I do think that would that would intrigue some teams, but just too much inconsistency, I think, to make him a top 10 pick, even though he has those raw traits and physical traits that are really intriguing. Cam Ward this past week, 27 of 38, 288 yards, 3 touchdowns and interception. The stat line looks a little bit better than I think the performance was this week. I thought there was some up and down moments for Cam Ward in this past week's game. I do think he has put himself in position now that it's him and Shadu Sanders as the clear top 2 quarterbacks in this draft class. I expect both of them to be gone within the first 5 picks of the draft. So we're going to kind of see the rest of this year, and he's going to kind of be under the microscope a little bit now that things have kind of settled out a little bit, and it's him and Sanders. I think you're going to see every single game, every single snap, every single drive of his really critique. That's just the way it is. And this game, I thought there were some up and downs and a little bit more inconsistency than we've seen, throughout this great year that he's had this year. Jackson Dart, he was generating some buzz over the last week or two, especially with some of the other quarterback prospects having their difficulty and struggling. But then this past week, Ole Miss loses to Florida. Dart did not look good. 2 interceptions, 24-41. Listen, I've never been in on Dart. Some people really were intrigued with him. To me, he's more of a late round 3, day 4, round 4 type prospect. I still stand by that. I think the scheme there at Ole Miss really helped his production, really helped his stat line look better than it was, and elevated his draft stock a little bit. I still just think there's a lot of aspects of his game that I don't see translating in terms of a high caliber starting quarterback at the next level. And I continue to say that. To me, he's more of an early day 3 type prospect. Shadu Sanders, Colorado came up short this past week to Kansas. Sanders had 266 yards and 3 touchdowns. The whole incident where he pushed a referee, obviously that's going to be talked about a lot, right? When you're Deion's son, when you've had a lot of, moments where your character and stuff like that has been critiqued, you have a moment like that. There wasn't even a flag, but it's obvious. It's all over the film that he did clearly push him. It's a story. It's going to be a story. But I think what we've seen again all year is him keeping his team competitive in games that overall the team is playing poorly. I think Colorado has outperformed expectations this year. And I think it's a 1A, 1B. I think it's going to be hard pressed for me to put Cam Ward over Shadu. They're my top two guys. I just think Sanders' ceiling is a little bit higher. His decision making has been a little bit better, throughout his collegiate career. And he's just been a guy who's elevated the programs that he's been with. And I think he's got that personality, that really could succeed and handle the pressures and the rigors of the NFL. He's got the bloodlines. So, as a Giants fan, they've been sending the contingency hard, and it's not even draft season yet. They've been at multiple Colorado games. Just today, there was, video and film of them at Colorado's practice today. A lot going on in terms of how much attention the Giants are giving to Shadu Sanders, probably trying to learn about him and get to fully know the prospect, as obviously if things continue to go as they go, the Giants are going to be picking right near the top of this draft, and Shadu Sanders might very much be in the mix. If it's not him, maybe Cam Ward, but those are the two guys that the Giants and other teams near the top of the draft, especially who are eyeing quarterbacks, are going to be really dissecting over the next couple of months. Quinn Ewers, 191 yards, 2 touchdowns. I'm very fascinated to see where the NFL views Quinn Ewers right now, because I think a lot of people had him as like that fringe round one guy when the year started, and then he started out the year so well. There was a lot of hype around top 10, top 5. Could he put himself in that mix? Then he got hurt. Arch stepped in. Ewers eventually came back and got the job back. But it doesn't look like that same player. And the inconsistencies and the refinement and development that we thought we needed, prior to the season starting, has kind of reared its ugly head again. There's been a lot of ups and downs. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see Quinn Ewers' path. Does he think about the transfer portal? Does the NFL view him as a top 50 guy, even if it's maybe not round one? Do they view him as a top of the second round? Is he a guy who could sneak into the back end of round one? I think those are the questions that surround Quinn Ewers right now. If we spin this to the running back discussion, in that Colorado game that I mentioned before, Devin Neal of Kansas, who I've been a fan of his game. I think I had him maybe like number 9 or 10 my preseason ranks. 207 yards and 3 touchdowns. He put together a monster game this past week. I really am intrigued by his game. Like, this is a guy who's got breakaway speed to be a big play threat, but he's also got the size and the physicality to run between the tackles. He can get to the outside. He's got lateral quickness. He's got burst. He can do a lot of different things. So I think Devin Neal's a really intriguing prospect, probably somewhere in that round 4 range. But he's a guy who I think we could see a little bit of a building crescendo to close the season, and then in the pre-draft months as well. Caleb Johnson continues to look like one of the top backs in the country. 35 carries, 164 yards. We know he can handle a heavy workload. He's going to bring that leg drive, that power, that play strength, and physicality. The question for him is like, what's his role at the next level? Is he just an early down, short yardage? That's going to limit his upside. Teams aren't going to want to invest a second or third round pick, I don't think, in a player like that. Like, he will be thought of highly, but is it round 2, round 3, or are we talking more round 4, round 5? I think that kind of depends on what NFL teams think about his overall, upside in terms of, is he a 2-down player? Could he be functional in the passing game? Is he a guy that you're going to have to take off the field on most pass downs? Some of that might be tied into pass protection. Those are the questions that I think you're going to surround Caleb Johnson over the coming months. And then the Ohio State guys, Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins. Judkins this past week, 14 carries, 36 yards, only 2.6 yards per carry. I mean, on the season, his stats are fine. 759 yards, 5.6 yards per carry, 8 touchdowns. But his teammate there, Travion Henderson, 730 yards this season, 7.4 yards per carry, 6 touchdowns. So you see the big playability for Henderson. We've known he's always had that in his arsenal since his freshman year when he exploded onto the scene. Judkins in that Ole Miss offense was a little bit more big play dependent in terms of we saw him make big plays, we just haven't seen a lot of that in Ohio State. So again, that comes back to, I talked before about that Ole Miss scheme with some of his big plays and gaudy stats, a product of that scheme and that offense that they had there at Ole Miss. And now here at Ohio State with another really talented running back in the backfield, it's not like Judkins has really been separating himself. He really looks more dependent upon what the O-line produces for him, and he can get what's there. He's not a creator, and that's always been my biggest fear about Judkins. Not a big-time creator, not a make-you-miss kind of guy, not a big play speed guy. So when the NFL views him, what are they going to view him? Not a great receiver. So are they going to view him as an early down, 2-down runner who doesn't have a lot of juice to be a big play threat? Because then if the case is, well, then why do you like him more than Nicholas Singleton? Or a guy like, his teammate, Travion Henderson, who maybe could offer that different component, that big playability. If you then start just comparing Judkins to a guy like Caleb Johnson, how does the NFL view that? Are they both viewed as early down physical runners between the tackles? Johnson's had a far superior statistical year, and I understand Judkins is splitting the load with Travion Henderson for Ohio State. But like I said, you have two guys in that backfield. One guy's production, very intriguing in terms of his overall, yards per carry. Judkins, very ho-hum for a college running back, especially, in an Ohio State offense like that. So I'm going to be really interested. Obviously we know Genty's going round 1. I don't think anybody else is even going top of round 2 at this point. Maybe Marion Hampton can be in the mix, but I think the other guys are more a little bit later on in day 2. And I'm very intrigued once we start, seeing the people like Lance Zierlein and Kuiper starts talking about him more. And Dane is on more podcasts and stuff like that, talking about these guys to see are any of these other running backs or any of the Ohio State guys, are they looked at as round 2 type guys? Or we're talking more in that round 3, round 4 range. And that's a little bit different than when the season started. Some people had these guys right there in the same tier as Genty. Genty was kind of in his own tier for me before the season started and continues to be there, far and away the best running back in the country. If we take this over to the pass catchers, Ty Felton out of Maryland, we've talked about him a couple times this year. I just wanted to kind of spotlight him again. On the season, 92 catches, almost 1,100 yards and 9 touchdowns this past week, 57 yards and 2 touchdowns. The 6'2", 186-pound wide receiver can get vertical, big play threat waiting to happen on the outside, but he's got some size to him as well at 6'2". He can go up and get the football. Ty Felton, I think, has now put himself with this elite productive year on the mix in that round 3, round 4 bubble. And I think he's a guy that could just generate more buzz in the pre-draft months. And you can see his stock and more nationally regarded. I don't think right now a lot of people are talking about him. I think Felton's a guy who could see his stock really rise over the coming months. Luther Burden, kind of locked in, I think, for most people, is wide receiver 3 right now. This past week, 91 yards and a touchdown, still showing that great run after catch ability, the play strength, the toughness you like to see for Burden, big playability as well. But right now, Travis Hunter, who this past week, 125 yards and 2 touchdowns. Tet McMillan, we know what he can bring to the table. He's like a combination of like Drake London, Mike Evans. I think it's going to be Hunter and McMillan in some order. Luther Burden probably comes in at the 3rd spot there. And then Emeka Igbokwe, 7 catches, 80 yards and a touchdown. I think him and Burden and maybe Isaiah Bond, if you're looking for that big play, speed and vertical component, I think those are the guys that are probably in the mix after, McMillan, Tet McMillan and Travis Hunter as the clear top 2 wide receivers in the country. At the tight end position, Tyler Warren continues to just dominate, 8 catches, 102 yards. I think now the question is how far into round 1? Because I think he's now going to go round 1. I think him and Colston Loveland both have a chance to go round 1. I think Tyler Warren may have leapfrogged Colston Loveland to be the tight end 1 in this class. Is he a guy who, do we see this like a couple years ago where we had like Dalton Kincaid in the 20s and other guys in the mix? In the early 2nd round, we had Laporta and Luke Musgrave. I think we're kind of heading there with Warren and Loveland. But I could see a scenario now where Warren's going top 25-ish, top 20-ish. I think that's where he's now in the mix. A lot of people have said like he could be a guy that like a team like the Chargers look like, or Harbaugh can reunite with Colston Loveland, his former college tight end. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think the Chargers could really use a guy who could attack the seam, be a big weapon in terms of that game, especially how much they rely on the run game. A pass-catching weapon tight end could be really beneficial to them. Harbaugh has always liked to have one of them when he's been able to. Elijah Arroyo out of Miami, 6 catches, 79 yards, really putting together a nice bounce-back year. He's had some health issues over the years, but this year, 26 catches, 482 yards, and good red zone weapon as well. But that is major production that he's attacking the seam. He's getting vertical. Teams love that when they're looking for playmaking tight ends who can, attack the seam, stretch the field, and be a big play weapon. Arroyo is putting himself back on the map as a potential pass catching option somewhere on day 3. If we spin this over to the Devy Slant Report, kind of want to talk about DJ Lagway. We've talked a lot about the quarterbacks. Like last week, we talked about Nico, and we talked about Dylan Raiola. DJ Lagway is that other guy that not eligible to 2027. So he's that draft class with Dylan Raiola. I think next year we're going to be talking about Arch and Nico. And the year after, we're going to be talking about Lagway and Raiola. Lagway has shown he hasn't played nearly as much as those other guys. The stats haven't been as gaudy at times. But you watch Lagway play. You look at the size, the frame, the athleticism, the arm talent. I think it was Field Yates out of ESPN was talking on Twitter this past weekend that you already could envision a scenario with the first pick of the 2027 NFL draft, said NFL team selects DJ Lagway. I think that's it's kind of fascinating that we're looking at 2 years now, next year and the year ahead, and there's 2 quarterbacks in each of the potential draft classes, 2026, 2027, that are already being talked about. We'll see what happens. We'll see if Nico and Arch can live up to the hype next year and be those 2 guys near the top of the 2026 NFL draft. We'll see if years down the line, Dylan Raiola and DJ Lagway can be those guys at the top of the 2027 NFL draft. A lot of pressure, a lot of scrutiny when you're being analyzed from years before you're draft eligible. And that we've kind of seen this year. We've kind of seen a little bit of a roller coaster for Raiola. We've seen a roller coaster for other young quarterbacks this year. Lagway is a guy who hasn't, I think, played enough yet. And we haven't seen enough yet where people have started to critique him. But I think we see the raw traits. We see the upside. We see the talent. We kind of think he's going to naturally continue to get better and grow. And he could be a guy that we're talking about at the top of that 2027 class. And I think that's going to intrigue some teams. Long-term plan at the quarterback position. You don't want to think too far ahead. You don't know what's going to happen in terms of your NFL team. But teams do like to look ahead just to kind of compare what's coming out this year, what's coming out down the line. It doesn't bode well for this year's class when teams are looking and they see that the talented prospects of a Arch, of a Nico, of a Dylan Raiola, of a DJ Lagway. Shea Dew and Cameron Ward are good prospects. I don't think anybody's looking at them in terms of their raw traits, in terms of their ceiling as a prospect, and looking at them the same way these guys are looked at. And I know that we got years in the making on some of them, or a full year for 2 of them. A lot can change, right? We've seen that. Once upon a time, Spencer Rattler was going to be the first pick in the NFL draft until he wasn't, until things went sideways. DJ Olangale was going to be a top pick coming out of Clemson until he wasn't. I'm not saying that's going to happen with these 4 young quarterback prospects, but we do keep it in the mind that a lot can change from one year to the next. But NFL teams, as well as evaluators on draft Twitter, do look ahead. And we see these 4 quarterback prospects kind of waiting in the wings down the line. And it's going to be Lagway is another one of those guys right there with the other 3 we're going to be talking a lot about over the next couple of years. Obviously, Florida, I've mentioned before, the victory this past week. In terms of beating Ole Miss, Lagway looked really good, showed some of that high-end upside and high-end ceiling that really has teams intrigued. Let's spin this over to the NFL side of things. Start with the NFL Rookie Report this past week. Jaden Daniels, Washington comes up short against a very injury Dallas team who's missing Dak Prescott, who's missing a lot of other players. Cooper Rush is at the helm. And Jaden Daniels, he almost pulled off a miracle at the end again. But there's been a little bit of up and down over the last couple of weeks with Jaden Daniels. I mean, his stats still are gaudy because of that play to McLaurin. He had 2 touchdowns, 275 yards. He had 74 yards rushing, but he also had 2 interceptions. he's been a little bit more resistant. Now, this week he did run for 74 yards, but prior to that, was it the rib injury? Is it NFL teams just throwing things at him? We are so quick to anoint. We are so quick. And I still think Jane Daniels is going to be a flat out superstar. But we do have to understand and slow down and understand that there's going to be ups, there's going to be downs. We see with every young quarterback. I mean, I'm going to talk about him in a little bit, but like, look at CJ Stroud. From year 1 to year 2, it has not been as easy. There's been a lot of growing pains this year that we didn't see as much last year. So Jane Daniels is kind of going through that right now. Washington was not supposed to be this team that was in the thick of the playoff chase, in, competing for division, stuff like that in year 1. So I think when they started out as good as they did, expectations quickly rose up for not only the team, but for also Jane Daniels to do this week in and week out. And I do think that's something that there's going to be ups and downs. And in terms of fantasy, you're going to take that because the cheat code that he brings, puts him right there at the top of any dynasty quarterback ranks there with Josh Allen and Lamar at the quarterback position. But in terms of real life, there's going to be those growing pains, and they're going to go out and they're going to get him. My guess is another big time weapon in terms of the receiver. They still got to build the O line up around him. Right now, Austin Eckler and Brian Robinson are that backfield duo. I'm sure Eckler probably won't be there next year. They'll probably find somebody to try to complement Brian Robinson. But I think what we've seen from him has been normal in terms of the ups and downs. But I do think that inconsistency has now opened the door for Bo Nix to potentially put himself in the position to win Rookie of the Year, which I can't even imagine. If you go back and listen to my weekly shows for the first 5 weeks of the season, the discussion around Bo Nix was did he deserve to even be a starter anymore? How quickly was Denver going to have to move on? Would they give Zach Wilson or Jarrett Stidham a chance? It looked like he didn't belong on the football field, but this is why I think quarterbacks do got to play. And the sooner you get them on the field, I think the better it is. If they're going to make it, just like Drake May, if you're going to make it, you got to learn on the job. And I think you see and get that experience in who we see right now from Bo Nix is so different than what we saw in the early portion of the season. It's mind-boggling. We all knew that he might have been reached a little bit. And if Denver didn't take him, maybe he doesn't go to the end of round 1 or even falls to round 2. But we also talked a lot about that perfect marriage between scheme, coach, player, between Peyton, his scheme, and Bo Nix. And we're seeing it materialize this past week, 273 yards, 2 touchdowns. This is becoming a weekly occurrence. His ball placement, his accuracy, very poised, calm, cool, and collected. He looks very much like the player who was a flat-out star at Oregon, but there were questions about whether or not his game would transfer. The physical traits, I think, are probably just average besides like his athleticism. I think he's an athletic guy. But he knows what to do. He's a very smart player. I remember watching him on a lot of things leading up to the draft. I think Josh Norris and Hayden Winks might have had him on, and they were talking to him, or somebody where he was watching. If it wasn't him, maybe it was Greg Cosell, and I'm forgetting exactly who it was, so I wish I can give credit for. But it was basically Bo Nix talking ball and breaking down, and he just came across as a really smart player who understood. And I think we're starting to see that, and that progression and that growth. He is picking up on the NFL game very fast. I don't know if he has the ceiling to be an elite quarterback at the NFL level, a Super Bowl winner, but he has quickly morphed into a guy that Denver's probably very happy they drafted him. He looks like he's going to be a good starting quarterback. And if that's the baseline, if they have found that, most teams would sign up for that in round 1 of the draft and then see kind of what happens from there, especially if he's already doing that in year 1. He's helping them to get victories. Denver's turned their season around, and the major reason is how well Bo Nix has played over the last month and a half or so. At the running back position, Bucky Irving continues to really look productive, look good, eating more and more into that backfield. I know Sean Tucker stole like 2 goal line touchdowns this past week, but 12 rushes for Bucky Irving for 87 yards. I know it was against the pathetic Giants. They look lackluster effort, but also 6 catches. We already know that Bucky Irving is a really good on their team. He's probably their best natural runner when you line him up against Tucker and Rachaad White. But Rachaad White was supposed to be the guy that dominated the pass catching work. We know Bucky Irving can catch the football. We saw it in college. If he's already taking a lot of that work from Rachaad White, we're talking about a guy who could be a real diamond in the rough here, a guy that most people probably were most people probably got him in the third round of their rookie draft, depending on things, maybe even the early portion of the fourth. There was a lot of guys that were kind of jumbled together. He's a guy who I think is going to be a very hot ticket to try to get your hands on in dynasty leagues. I will always say, be careful. It's a day 3 running back. We've seen this play out, but I also, with Rachaad White there, with Sean Tucker there, I'd be very surprised if the Bucs made another investment in the first 3 rounds of the draft. So I think he's a guy that feels a little bit safe in terms of his role developing and maybe even getting a larger workload in year 2. So I think Bucky Irvin could be a really good buy if some people do have those reservations. Day 3 pick, Rachaad White's still there, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe Sean Tucker's in the mix next year as well. We're down the stretch this year. But Irving has looked really good, can handle, can be a runner, can be a receiver out of the backfield. So he's got rebound potential. And I think a lot of teams are intrigued by that at the NFL level. And he fits really well with Baker Mayfield in that offense right now in Tampa Bay. Taking this to the pass catchers, Malik Neighbors, 6 catches for 62 yards. We haven't seen a big-time explosive game from Neighbors since like the 4th or 5th week of the season. I think it's a product of the Giants. I think it's a product of their quarterback play. They're just poor overall general play. Don't lose sight of how talented of a player Malik Neighbors is. He should still be in most people's top 5, top 7, top 8, if you really want to stretch it out, dynasty wide receivers. If for some reason with, going into the offseason with how inept the Giants look, if he's not being valued that way, I think you could be very aggressive. Giants are going to have a new quarterback, whether it's Shady Sanders, whether it's Cam Ward, whether it's somebody else they trade for as like a stopgap or something. I think the offense, regardless, is going to look better next year. And Neighbors is still that guy that can be an elite guy that could be in the mix to be, wide receiver 1 in a year or 2 in terms of dynasty ranks for wide receivers. I would kind of use any poor production down the stretch of this year as a window to kind of maybe hope that the person who has him has some reservations, and maybe you can turn a high-end wide receiver and something else into Malik Neighbors if said owner is maybe a little concerned that he could still have quarterback issues, entering next year. Marvin Harrison, 3 catches, 47 yards. I mean, I think we need to have a conversation that besides one half of football, which is more like 1/4 of football, Marvin Harrison has not looked like a dominant player most of this season. And I'm not saying that means what we're going to see in year 2 and beyond, but we've seen wide receivers have dominant moments in their rookie year. Those have been very, very few and far between for Marvin Harrison Jr. So I do think there's some level of concern. Is he a good receiver? Is maybe even very good at some point. But he was supposed to be a transcendent talent. He was supposed to be a guy that was elite from basically year 1. There's got to be some level of concern there, whether you own him, whether you're a fan of his, is why aren't we seeing more production? Why do we see, so many targets go Trey McBride's way? And other times it was like Greg Dortch and Michael Wilson when he was there, healthy. What has it been that has minimized Marvin Harrison of being that guy that we thought was going to have a very heavy target share this year? Devon Vele, the 7th round rookie out of Denver, 32 catches, 361 yards, the 6'5", 210 player. Listen, they drafted Marvin Mims last year. Hasn't panned out. Courtland Sutton has been unbelievable this year. But Vele kind of fits that Sean Payton. He likes that bigger wide receiver as a possession guy. I'm kind of intrigued by him a little bit. And right now, he's still kind of like lingering around on some waiver wires. I'm not sure people are ready to think he could be a guy that could be a part of that Broncos wide receiving core in terms of like a top 2 or top 3. I wouldn't be so fast to write him off. I would get, if I can get him on my team right now for free or for basically nothing and just kind of see how the rest of his year plays out, I would definitely do so. Let's close out the night with the NFL Dynasty Fantasy Report. A couple of things. I mentioned it before. Conversation's got to be had about CJ Stroud. Houston loses this week. Terrible loss for Houston this past week. Stroud is 20 of 33, 2 interceptions. There's been a lot more down than there has been good this year for Stroud, which is so stunning after we saw him look so in control last year and so productive. But I think it goes back to what I was saying before. There is going to be ups and downs. I just think we use this as a little bit of and myself included, CJ Stroud, I did a startup dynasty draft in the summer, and I literally was picking near the top of round 1, and it's a super flex. And I was contemplating like CJ Stroud, like over Josh Allen, or CJ Stroud, like over those other guys. I ended up not doing that. I ended up taking Josh Allen instead of CJ Stroud, but it was a real debate. And I think that was coming off of that first year. And you realize CJ Stroud is not going to add anything with his legs. It's all got to be passing. So for him to be an elite fantasy asset, you're talking 36 to 40 touchdowns. You're talking a gaudy stat yardage also, because you're just not going to get anything else. And now this year, even with the addition of Diggs until his injury, Nico Collins has morphed into a flat-out superstar. Tank Dell's had a down second year, battled some injuries himself. Stroud just doesn't – you wonder how high can Stroud go in terms of his fantasy ceiling? I think it's a legitimate question now because so many other guys in the league are producing stuff with their yard, with the running capabilities as an added component on top of the passing. If Stroud gives you nothing in the run game, you need really high volume. And we've seen Joe Mixon have an unbelievable year. You know, their offensive philosophy comes from San Francisco. They're going to want to be, you know, D'Amico Ryans, Slowick, like those guys want to run the football. This isn't going to be throw the ball 55 times a game. So I think there's got to be a little bit of a reevaluation on CJ Stroud's dynasty upside. I still think he's going to be a great quarterback, can lead Houston to Super Bowl for sure. But I do think there's maybe a little bit of correction. I think it's happened naturally just during the season. But we just got to be careful with these quarterbacks to put them too high, especially if they're not add any component in terms of their rushing capability. Sometimes we rush to put them up somewhere, and then things start to level off and they start to fall back in the pack a little bit. And I think we've seen that this year with CJ Stroud. Stock up on Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley. I mean, I don't know more what we can say. You got to view running backs in short windows. There is no reason why Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs both can't be top 5 to top 7 running backs for the next couple of years. If Jacobs ends up staying in Green Bay, good offense, good scheme. Saquon in Philadelphia, amazing O-line, great run game, great running quarterback. I mean, we're seeing what Saquon's doing this year. He's going to be the first pick in redraft leagues next year, unless he has some injury that's pretty major down the stretch of the season. He's going to be the first pick, and he probably should be. Josh Jacobs, that contract could have been one that they got out of after year 1, but Marshawn Lloyd hasn't stepped onto the football field. I don't think Jacobs is going anywhere. So I think both of those guys probably are too low in most people's dynasty ranks. I don't think it's not going to be easy to get any of those guys. But even if you have a startup next summer, don't devalue Jacobs and Barkley with their age too much. Look at the running back window in 2-year intervals. These guys could still be very, very high-end RB1s for the next couple of years. And I think that's something that we really got to value a lot at the running back position of just how uncertain it is from year to year. Turning to the pass catchers, at the tight end position, Trey McBride, 12 catches, 133 yards this week. He's locked in as tight end 2. You could put Brock Bowers at 1. You could put a little bit of a gap. Trey McBride locked in at tight end 2, and then you could take another gap and then figure it out from there, because after tight end 3, after tight end 2, from 3 to whatever number you want to pick, 5, 6, 7, you can really shuffle it up. You have Laportas, you have Kincaids, you still have the older guys like Kelsey and Andrews and Hawkinson. You can rank them any way you want, but McBride is locked in there as tight end 2 only after Brock Bowers. We saw Hawkinson have his best game of the year, 7 catches, 114. If somebody wants to say that he belongs as tight end 3 because he's he's younger than guys like Mark Andrews, obviously younger than Kelsey, but he's in a good situation and he's been more productive, and moving forward, he might be more productive than guys like Kincaid and Laporta. I could totally understand that. But it was nice to see Hawkinson have his best game of the year. Noah Gray starting to become an interesting name, and not just because he keeps scoring 2 touchdowns every week this year, but it's obviously clear he has a good rapport with Patrick Mahomes. What if this is the year? Kansas City wins another Super Bowl or they make a deep run? What if this is the year Travis Kelce calls it quits? Noah Gray has an opportunity, especially if Mahomes likes him and has a good rapport with him, to maybe emerge there as their starting tight end. I'm not saying he's going to be Travis Kelce, but if he steps into a role there as the clear-cut starter, he could flirt with tight end one numbers for sure. Especially we know how much the Mahomes read offense utilizes the tight end. His confidence in Noah Gray has only got to be increasing with how good he's looked this year in spurts. So he'd be an interesting guy to try to get on your dynasty team. Jonnu Smith has rejuvenated himself, big integral part of the Dolphins pass offense. So he's an under name that, could be an interesting guy that's people are probably very reluctant to think he's got much long-term value, but who's to say that he can't be a guy who flirts with, tight end one numbers next year, as well as we've seen him productive and putting up tight end one numbers this year. And then the pass catchers, finally talked about him a lot over the last couple of weeks. We finally get that Jalen Waddle breakout game, 8 catches, 144 yards and a touchdown. I've been a Waddle guy since he came into the league. I have been a little concerned, and we've talked about it on here, but it was nice to see him put together that really strong performance. If he has another really, really down week, again, I would probably be in the market for trying to see if I can buy him a little bit lower than what his asking price would have been for, obviously, before this year. Jackson Smith-Njigba completely has separated himself now from Tyler Lockett as in terms of the second most productive receiver, most weeks the most productive receiver. I think you can start to make the case of JSN, DK Metcalf, long-term. Who would you prefer in dynasty leagues? I think it's a legitimate question. We know what Metcalf can bring to the table, but I do think Jackson Smith-Njigba, if put in a situation and put in a role very similar to like Cooper Kupp, I think he could be a focal point even out of the slot of a pass offense and produce very high-end stats like we've seen at times Cooper Kupp do for the Rams. So Jackson Smith-Njigba, well, for a while it looked like his ceiling might be limited to maybe like a wide receiver at 3. He's really showed enough down the last couple, portions of the season that I think now he could be a guy that's looked at as higher than that. He could be looked at as a top 24 type guy moving forward in dynasty circles, and maybe the ceiling isn't even as high as we could still potentially get. Jordan Addison, we saw him put together his best week of his career, 8 catches, 162 yards and a touchdown. If he morphs into a big-time weapon there, I mean, they're really set up there with him, Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson. So it was great to see Jordan Addison. We'll stock up on him. Obviously, next year we'll see who's at the helm. Is it J.J. McCarthy? Do they franchise tag Sam Darnold? That seems like, if so, is it just to trade him? A lot of questions at the quarterback position. But Jordan Addison, it's going to be hard with Justin Jefferson there. It's always going to curtail its fantasy value a little bit. But listen, we see Jamar Chase with T. Higgins, both, Jamar Chase be elite, T. Higgins very good. I don't think it's impossible if Jordan Addison becomes the player that some people thought he could be coming out of college, that there could be some of that there as well. We saw DJ Moore have a bounce back week. So this was kind of a bounce back week. We had talked about DJ Moore. We had talked about Jalen Waddle. They both finally put together really strong weeks showing, their upside and their ceiling, which is why guys who have produced and have a track record, we can't be so quick to just, throw to the curb because it's still in there. We saw it from DJ Moore this week. And then I mentioned him before, Courtland Sutton. I liked Courtland Sutton coming out way back. I wasn't in love with him like some people on draft Twitter. Then for a while, I thought he was who I thought he would be, a good NFL receiver. Then it looked like injuries had sapped his, his playmaking ability in terms of winning vertically down the field. A lot of nagging injuries. For a while, it looked like he was on the outs there in Denver. And now, he's morphing into a legit top 24, top 30 guy week in and week out. He's got another year on his contract in Denver. Could you even see maybe a long-term extension? And he's kind of locked in there with Bo Nix as one of their primary weapons. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility we see him sign a long-term contract this offseason to keep him away from free agency. And if that's the case, we see what his kind of ceiling and upside is. So I think stock up on Courtland Sutton as well. So there it is, guys. NFL Dynasty Fantasy Report, NFL Rookie Report, quick Devy Slant Report, and then obviously the bulk of the show early on was the 2025 NFL Draft Report, where we talked a lot about the quarterbacks and other draft-eligible prospects as well. If you're enjoying the content, please get over to the website, SS Football, fastest and easiest way to get there. Check out the premium content tab, and for $9.99, you can get access to all of our premium notebooks, the scouting notebook, the draft projections notebook, which launches in April, and then the rankings notebook as well. It is the lifeblood of our show. It is how we continue to bring what we do here at Saturday Sunday. So if you bought it in the past, we hope you consider purchasing it again. If you've never purchased it, but you've been a long-time listener, we hope you consider trying it out this year and helping us out tremendously. So on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nakano, and myself, thank you for joining us, and we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.